And today we'll be talking about the best practices for InTouch and when it comes to connecting with Win911. So let's move on. The way we break things down is by 3 different modules. We usually have our data source connection. If you've ever opened up Workspace before, you're going to see that under alarming. And this is our connection to the data source itself. This is what we connect to window viewer, otherwise known as view.exe. And so when you launch your window viewer, our data source connection will connect to that either by IP or by node name. Once the alarm has come into the data source, then it runs into our dispatcher. And you can think of that like the middleman. If you're again looking at the workspace and you go to our notifications module, you'll see our strategies and tactics. And that's really what makes up the dispatcher module. When the alarm is triggered, it triggers a strategy, and then that strategy will trigger a tactic, which is your call out list. And from there, it hits the notifiers. Depending on which notifiers you select, you could have them all set up if you'd like. Reporting comes into play when you want to try to request alarms. Maybe you want to dial into the system and request alarms. So you call in, it hits the reporting module. Reporting talks to the dispatcher or to the data source pretty much at the same time, formulates what alarms are available, whether they're act or not, and then ships it back out to your notifier. So in a situation with an email, maybe you've sent an email to your email gateway address, asked it for report 1, it'll send it back to the SCADA. SCADA grabs those alarms regardless, or those tags regardless of their values, and then sends it back to you in a report. Okay, so one of the things we can do is we can always distribute the modules with the Win911. What that means is perhaps you want your main dispatcher module and your main data source connection on the InTouch server, and maybe your server doesn't have internet access, so you could always install your email module on another machine that does have internet access to allow you to get email. The same for other utilizers, or notifiers. Perhaps you want to do it for the voice connection or the mobile connection. And then the way we connect to InTouch is through a process called the alarm.mgr.exe, and this will spawn in Task Manager, and it opens up one of 2 ways. If you open up Window Maker, it'll spawn this process. It is an InTouch process. Or if you run our Win911 InTouch Runtime app from the Start menu, it'll call on the same DLL and spawn the alarm MGR. Now both our InTouch Runtime, the Win911 InTouch Runtime, and the alarm MGR must run in the same session ID. And what that means is session IDs is like the user interface or the user process for it. Session 0 is typically your console session, a background session like a service. And then session 1 is normally your user interactive service or your session. And so you run Window Maker and as an application that would spawn in session 1. And then you run our InTouch Runtime from the Start menu, which runs as an application, and it also spawns in session 1. So if you're ever in a situation where you're maybe receiving alarms but not able to acknowledge, or maybe just not receiving alarms, then you might want to double check that alarm MGR to make sure that there is one running in session 1, and then the Win911 InTouch is also running in session 1. And I'll show you more of that in our demo later. And so also when it comes to acknowledgements and heartbeats, it utilizes the SweetLink part of it, which is a service that runs alongside with the alarm MGR process. We can connect remotely to InTouch applications. However, the InTouch software must be installed on the same machine as where Win911 is installed. So it's really about getting the DLLs, and oftentimes when I install it this way, I'll choose just the InTouch Runtime option only, and it does not have to be licensed for InTouch in order for this to work. So you can still have your developer license on your server and then just the InTouch Runtime on the same machine with Win911. And we can connect to multiple InTouch applications with a single Win911 system, and that requires no additional no feed, which is pretty nice. Another thing when it comes to the remote traffic, you will want to make sure that TC port 5413 is open. Now this is more of the talking about the session IDs again. So one thing that can happen is you have your InTouch server, you open up Window Viewer, it spawns a alarm MGR in session 1, but if someone were to log into that with RDP and open up another session of Window Maker, it'll spawn a second alarm MGR in session 2. If a third person logged in through RDP, you would get a session 3 and so on. And this can make Win911 confused on which one to attach to. So typically you want to create a master instance so everything runs in session 1. And InTouch has a knowledge base article on this. We also have a knowledge base article on this, on how to configure your InTouch system to be able to handle this. Now this is a screenshot of the flow control. This is an issue that you might run into where you'll see in the Win911 logs that it's stopped submitting, or data has been suspended and then resumed, and you might see that error over and over and over in our logs. InTouch created a registry file that would fix this, and you can download that through our KB. This is basically the change it makes to the registry. And one way we recommend grouping alarms together is to add it to a group. So maybe you have thousands of alarms in your system, but you only want Win911 to notify on certain ones. And there's ways to bring those into Win911, either through just importing all the tags, which could be tedious, or you could create a subscription. And so you go through your alarms and just say, add these to group A, and then we could create a subscription in Win911 to bring in all those alarms for group A. So that way we're not notifying on every single alarm in your system, just the ones that you want Win911 to notify on. There's other ways to do it, which I'll show you examples of later, but grouping is probably one of the easiest. Another is priority, and we have a couple other options. You could do specific tag names if you want. And I'll show you more of that in the demo later. And here's an example of our subscription where you can create the subscription and just say, I want everything from a specific group. And perhaps you want alarms to go to different people for different reasons. And so you could create a group A and group those alarms together that might go to your technicians. You could create another group called group B, and you could add that to each tag where you might want those to go to operators or engineers, or you can separate it. And this is an example of how you can create those filters to call on a strategy to call different groups of people. Because in the Win911 world, alarm triggers a strategy, which is really like the policy. What do you want to do with it when it's acknowledged? Do you want to re-notify? And which call out group do you want to call on? And so in this situation, if an alarm triggered and it was in group B, well, it would check group A first, realize the filter didn't match, and move on to rank 2 and say, okay, I matched this filter, so I'm going to take strategy B, which could be for a completely different tactic call group. If the alarm did trigger for group A, then it would call on strategy A. Strategy A would call on tactic A and call out a completely different call group. So it's a good way of making sure the alarm gets to the right person, the right notification gets to the right person. One thing we can do is create a watchdog. A watchdog is a way for us to monitor your SCADA. So best practice there is you would have a actual tag that's actually got to be an alarm, but you could make it a fake alarm, I suppose. One that basically goes active, inactive every 10 seconds. And if we did not see that state change happen within 90 seconds, then we would assume something's wrong with the SCADA, and we would send out our own notification based on what strategy it triggered and what tactic. And so you could decide who gets that call out if that happens. But yeah, best practice there is usually an alarm that's basically going active, inactive all day long. You could filter it out of your alarm summary screen in InTouch, so you don't have to keep seeing it there. But as long as we keep seeing that state change, we'll think that everything's going fine, and you won't get your watchdog alarm for that. However, if the alarm stopped processing and we did not see that state change, after 90 seconds in this case, we would send out a notification saying, hey, looks like something's wrong. We're not receiving alarms from InTouch, and you can go take a look at it. And then heartbeats is the reverse of that. Heartbeat is Win911 writing to the SCADA, writing to a tag in increments of 1 every 1 minute. And so If we were to stop writing to the SCADA, then you can assume something's wrong with Win911 in this case. And then you know to go check Win911. So typically what people do is in their HMI, they will have a place where it's showing a Win911 heartbeat counter, and they'll just watch that, or you'll have some sort of flag there that might brighten up if it hasn't changed in 1 minute. But if you're watching it, you would see it count, go 1 through 9, and reset back to 0. And we do have a knowledge base article that goes into great detail on how to set this up. And so you're welcome to review that. And if you have any trouble with it, definitely open a ticket with us and we'll be happy to help. One of our new features is the contacts utility. This is a way of being able to switch around a tactic to call out order, or change people's schedules, or change their roles without having to open up workspace every time. And so you can embed this button. When you install contacts utility, it creates it as a separate exe. It's a simple exe that just opens up, and you can always embed a button in your HMI for operators to click on to open up the contacts utility and quickly change the call out list. You can change the order, you can change the retries, you can change their schedules around, and also remove them from the tactic, add someone else to the tactic, and then also manipulate their roles. And if you're looking to install Win911 for the first time on InTouch, one of the things we do recommend is reviewing our install checklist. This is on our main website. If you go to our documents section, and it's going to be under support. Usually I just hover the mouse over the support tab, let that drop down appear, and you'll see options there for like creating a support ticket, creating or looking for knowledge base articles, going to the documentation section, reviewing how-to videos and things of that nature. So one of the things we're working on now is we're creating a new Core 5, which is going to look more like our old system. It's going to be a desktop app again. And so no more IIS, no more Silverlight, and it'll also decrease the resource usage. It's going to make it easier too for you to pick and choose who you want to log into the app. So you could always decide who can log in and what they have access to the app. Another thing we're going to be including, which I thought was pretty cool, is shared contacts, where people can share a phone now, an on-call phone, and you can list who has access to that phone, so they can share that same phone number. Each person will still have to have their own unique authorization code, but again, you'll be able to share a phone number in the future, which I thought was going to be a great feature coming up. And then we're going to have redundancy, some automatic failover to backup, and then syncing with the configuration database. Also, we're going to be updating OPC UA with alarms and conditions. I'm pretty excited about that. One of the things you can do too is always create a feature request on our website. So on our website, it's usually at the very top where you can say submit a request a feature, and you click that link. It takes you to a page where you can ask or say what you'd like to have added, and we'd be happy to hear from you. And thank you all. So I'm going to let Arish get into his bit on the mobile, and then we'll show you a quick demo on Win911.
Excellent, thanks. Thanks, Chris. Yes, I'll talk a little bit more about mobile, and then we'll actually show you a full demo of Win911 running with kind of with InTouch and how that looks. Okay, great. So, quick thing, Win911 has a new mobile app, and it's called Win911 Mobile. And it's a great app. It has a lot of features that you guys can take a look at. We'll talk through some of those pretty quickly before we get into the actual demo of the Win911 software. Here I'll just show you some applications. You can download the demo out of your Google Play Store or your Apple Store, and just gotta look for that logo, the Win911 logo. It's a little rocket going northeast in red. So look it up. It's free to download. You're able to play with it. We have the demo and you're able to do a lot of different things with that. With that said, what are some of the highlights? What are some things that are new to Win911 that we didn't have before? Well, we have a native UI with Apple and Android. We have security enhancements, obviously push notifications, and then multiple sites. So in the pictures on the left-hand side, you can see that Ben I. Williams at gmail.com is the person that has logged in. But if you look at the bottom of that where it says allow notifications, and we have building 22, site 2012 R2 V5, and electric control, those are the multiple sites. So if you have multiple Win911 software in multiple sites, you're going to be able to see all of the alarms in a single mobile app. So that is quite cool, quite unique that Win911, the mobile app, is now able to do. The picture in the middle is a sample of alarms that you're going to be able to get. So let's move on from here. Here's an example of what the Win911 would look like, right? You have site A, site B, site C. It could be building 1, 2, and 3, depending if each one of the buildings has a Win911 software. We go through Microsoft Azure, and then it will hit your cell phone, your Android or iPhone. It could also be a watch, a smart watch, or it could also be a tablet. With that, once again, some of the highlights that you're going to be able to see is inside of the app, it's control of alarm formats. So you're going to be able to change, add, or remove how much information you want on that alarm, right? In the left-hand side, you can see tags, connection, severity, value, event time, active time, actor, which is the person that has activate or acknowledge the alarm, comments, and a lot of different things. Chat with other team members. This is a new highlight for this mobile app, and it's fantastic. You're going to be able to chat immediately with everybody that has received the alarm and is currently actively looking that alarm inside of the app. So what can happen? You get an alarm, right? In this case, it's a freshwater tank, the gate valve, right? You can communicate with the group of people that have received that alarm. And in this case, Charles says, I am off site, I cannot investigate. But Adam says, I'm in building 2 at the moment. And then I am responding, I'll take a look at it. It looks like it's a false alarm. Jeremy's conducting maintenance. So that's the type of information that you're going to be able to do. The other part, and that is on the picture on the right-hand side, which it says alarm, SCADA, freshwater tank, gate valve, and then right below that it says teams. So now you can track who has seen the alarm. So you can see Dan, Adam, and Charles are the ones that receive the alarm, but in each one of the names, right on the right-hand side, you're going to be able to see a little eyeball. If the eyeball is open, that means that the person has seen the alarm. If the eyeball is closed, that means that they have not. So as you can see, Dan and Adam have seen that alarm, but Charles has not yet. And then we also have a do not disturb mode. So let's say that somebody's out on vacation, they're getting pings, notifications of different alarms. You can go ahead and take it to the next part, which is, what's the security and how does it work? So security has always been a priority for Win911, and this new mobile app really is an outbound initiation, no firewalls exception. So we can kind of talk through that here. In the left-hand side, you have the plant network, where you have the module of Win911 module, and that's inside of your plant network, which generally is not direct connected to the internet, right? What we have done is an optional security component, which is what we call a Win911 Mobile Hub. and that sits in the business network, or what we call the DMZ. So you can have that hub, and it allows you to jump into the plant network without having any connections directly to the internet inside of your plant network. So you use the intranet. And then from there, you have the Azure Cloud Services, which is what we call the Win911 Mobile Web API. And we use Azure Active Directory Web API to ensure that you are who you are, right? So Microsoft Azure actually keeps track of your name, phone number, contact information, and that's how we verify that you are the person that you have set up to put your information and be able to send the alarm from your plant network to your business network directly to your cloud services, and then that into your phone. So with that, I'll actually go ahead and give the screen back to Chris Cave, and then we'll actually show you how the Win911 software works. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Chris, now you can take it from here.
All right. So this is a quick demo of Win911. Let me go ahead and put this in full screen. Okay. So in this case, I've already triggered an alarm, and it's come into my log viewer. And right now, I received a mobile alert on my phone, and I took a screenshot of it, so you should be able to see that. And right now, it's unacknowledged. So I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge it from my phone, and if everything is configured correctly, it should work. Okay. So it did disappear. That means it's acknowledged. The reason why is because of my strategy stop condition. When I set that to when acknowledged, that's basically Win911's done its job, and so it disappears from log viewer, which is the ideal practice. You really don't want to keep logs or alarms in log viewer indefinitely. So right now, it act back to my SCADA, and we'll say that someone cleared the alarms. I'm going to set that back to 0, and we'll get it to disappear. And so the way I did that, the way I got that set up, I started with a contact. We usually always want to configure left to right. So I started with the contact, creating my gateway, went into mobile. We provide you with the mobile account. You set that up, and this is what connects to Microsoft Azure. From there, you will create your mobile users, and it's done through email address. As soon as you add someone with their email address, they're going to receive an email invite from Microsoft. They click accept, put in their username, which is going to be their email address. They'll get to pick a password if it's their first time creating a Microsoft account. Otherwise, if they're already using a Microsoft account, just continue to use the same password. And once that's set, they have a username and password. They can go download the app from either Google Play or the App Store if you're on iPhone. And when you open the app, you'll be prompted with a username and password for that Microsoft account. Log in, and you can start receiving alarms for that. The other thing you want to make sure when you do create a user is just making sure that they are able to act, unless you don't want them allowed acting, but in most cases, I'd say most people do. So you'd want to turn that on. And just a quick note about our tools. If you want to create a new user, we use the plus down here. If you want to delete a user, you can by selecting their little box and deciding if you want to delete them or not. Now, you can't straight up just delete someone easily if they're already part of a tactic. And so you could use the utilizers to see what tactic they're in, and then go to that tactic, remove the user from there, and then you'll be able to delete them. And in this case, this user is not in any tactic, so I can just go ahead and delete him and shouldn't have any problems in doing so. Okay, so once we have our users created, and sorry, let me backtrack just a little bit. If you ever want to edit the page, it's the pencil down here at the bottom right. We hit our pencil, and that way we can make changes if we wanted to. We can change our act option here, set up some alarm requests, and then we can see what tactics I'm a part of. Once we're done with what we want, we would hit our save button, but because I didn't make any changes, I don't have my save, but I can just come in here and kind of pull it real quick, hit my backspace, type the same letter, and now I should be able to save. So once we have our connections, we move to the next stage to the right. So we always want to go left to right. And we're going to create a tactic first. I'm going to start off with just a basic. And I've already got a tactic in place, but if I were to create a new one, just hit the plus sign, give it a name. The delay before notification is if you want to delay the call out, maybe you want to give the alarm time to go inactive before calling anyone out, so you could set a delay of a couple minutes. And the repeat is how often your list is going to repeat itself based on your strategy stop condition. And I'll talk about that in a bit more. If you want to add a person, it's going to be your plus sign down here. You'll get your list of all the folks that are available for notifications. I could go ahead and add everyone. I could put a delay between each connection here. I'm going to go ahead and just set it for a minute. And this retry is if the notification to that person fails, it will try to retry it. So a good example of that is, let's say you're doing a voice call out, it calls the operator and he fat thumbs his authorization code and he gets a failed authorization code and it disconnects him. It'll retry because it sees that as a failure and move on and try to call that person again if you have a retry set up. Now let's say it calls that operator and it goes to his voicemail. It's going to consider that as a successful attempt and move on to the next person because that person didn't acknowledge it. And so that way, so if it goes to someone's voicemail, it's not just going to retry that same person. You can always add this person twice though if you want. And I'll show you an example of that. Like maybe you do want to call the same person. So here I have Win911 on the call list. I could always add it again if I like. I can put them in one more time. And that way I would guarantee that it's going to try to call that person again, even if it goes to his voicemail. And so let's talk about each row here. The retry again is only if there's a failure. So in this email situation, if it emails out and emails went successfully, it's not going to retry. But perhaps the email failed for whatever reason, then it might try again. And you could always set a delay between the retries there. Not so much important for email, but maybe you might want to do that for voice connections because voice connections you need time to disconnect, reconnect, and deal with the modem. So it's usually good practice to put at least a minute in there, I would say. Same is true for the delay after, especially for the voice connections. So it tries calling this person. You'd want to give it a delay of at least a minute before it moves on to the next person. So overall, what this is saying is email Frank, wait 1 minute, email Ryan, wait 1 minute, email Brian, and so on and so on. And I'm going to cancel out of this for just a second and actually show you a good way of escalating through email and mobile. And so if I go to my normal maintenance here, this is a scenario where, let me put in a couple of repeats here. So this is a scenario where the alarm is triggered, no delay before notification. It's going to send me a mobile alert. It's going to email the rest, and it's going to wait 30 minutes for someone to acknowledge it. If no one had acknowledged it by 30 minutes, it's going to repeat the list based up this number here and try again. I get my mobile alert, Jill and everyone else gets an email, and then again it waits for an acknowledgement. If no one has acknowledged by this point, it'll try again, and it'll keep doing that up to 5 times, which is probably long enough for someone to acknowledge it by that point. So now that we have our tactic created, now we want to move on to our strategy. And so your standard basic strategy is the initial event is always what you want to start with. That's the alarm coming in and the initial time of that alarm starting its life cycle. And typically every alarm comes in as active unacknowledged. Then it starts our tactic, our maintenance, which we saw earlier was to notify me via email and notify the rest via email. And if no one acknowledges it after 30 minutes, it'll keep trying. If someone were to acknowledge it, that stops this strategy, which in turn stops the tactic, and then we will get a re-notify on state change in that scenario. It will let my mobile app know that the alarm has been acknowledged, and everyone on the email list will also get an email that the alarm has been acknowledged. Now, once the alarm clears, no one will get notified other than the mobile app. Only the mobile app at that point gets notified, but the email users do not, because the strategy has been stopped by this point, and that way it's not going to re-notify those people that were emailed. Now, you do have other options for your stop condition. The default is when terminal. So a terminal alarm is an alarm that's been acknowledged and returned to normal. And so usually an alarm has 4 stages, 4 state changes that can occur. Usually the first is the alarm is active, unacknowledged. It can return to normal and become inactive, unacknowledged. And in that scenario, if you acknowledge it, it becomes inactive, acknowledged. And that is a terminal alarm. That's when it's cleared its life cycle, it's done. The SCADA will stop processing it, we will stop processing it. And if that alarm occurred again, it creates a new life cycle for it and would come in as active, unacknowledged. In a perfect world, what we really like to see and want is an alarm comes in as active, unacknowledged. An operator receives that notification and acknowledges that alarm, so it changes state to an active, acknowledged alarm. And then that operator clears the alarm, returns to normal, becomes inactive, acknowledged, which is a terminal alarm in the Win911 world. And usually in the SCADA world too. That's usually when it disappears from your alarm summary screen and it's done. And so back to the other scenario where you have an alarm that was active, unacknowledged, and then it went inactive, unacknowledged. If it went active again, it would still be part of that same lifecycle ID. So you would see basically the same alarm in your alarm summary screen, also in Win911 log viewer, as the single alarm changing states multiple times because it never met that terminal state. It never completed its life cycle. And we can always uncheck the re-notify on state change, but keep in mind for the mobile app to work properly, you do need this enabled. Otherwise, you'll be in a situation where a user receives their mobile notification, they try to acknowledge, and it'll typically error out on them and not show them that it was acknowledged. So you usually always want to keep that. And so the third stage, now that we have our strategy configured, so let me just save that. Then we would go move on to alarming. And if we saw earlier in the slides, this was our data source connection, this was our dispatcher, and these are our notifiers. And so in our slide earlier, it was really going left to right. The alarm was coming in through the data source, hitting the dispatcher, going out to the notifications. But when we configure Win911, we typically go from left to right. So now we're going to move on to alarming. I am going to go to my InTouch. And by the way, this is a scenario where I'm connecting to 2 different SCADAs. I have InTouch Edge and InTouch, but we're going to just focus on InTouch today. And there are 2 ways to bring in the alarms. You can either import the tags, which you could, typically you go into your InTouch application manager, you click a DB dump, which creates a CSV file, and then you can use this import to open up the CSV file and bring in the alarms you have. Right now I don't have that dump file anywhere, so I won't be able to show you that, but once it's basically just reading your CSV file. You're going to see a list of all the alarms in there. You can pick and choose which ones you actually want to import, and you can tell it which strategy you want to import it to. So that's why it's a good idea to already have your tactic and strategy created by the time you get to this point, because then you could just tell the alarms quickly to import to your strategies that you want. Otherwise, it's going to put it into the default strategy, and the default does the notify all, which notifies everyone in no particular order. So typically you don't want to do that unless maybe you have a handful of people that are all getting emailed. But that is the first way to bring in the alarms. And once you import it, it becomes part of your tag database. And so here I have a digital alarm. And if I switch to the alarm tab, I can see what strategy it's pointing to. And a couple other things to mention about this. If I were to edit this, here we have the option to override the description or the alarm comment in InTouch. And so perhaps you don't have a really good description in your comment section for the alarm in InTouch. You could always override it, put something here, and it would read off this instead. And to get more into that, I'll show a bit more about that alarm format with the customizing for the users here in a minute. But this is how you would get that started. And so we're going to cancel out of that. And then the other way to bring in alarms is through subscriptions. And so we start by actually creating the subscription itself. These aren't in use yet until you add it to a route, which I'll show you here in a minute. But here I have a couple examples. Our default is the all alarms, and it basically brings in all alarms. So any alarm that goes that's in InTouch, we would react on that and see it. If you want to focus on specific alarms, there's a way of doing it by priority. So I have a priority here of 800, and this is only going to bring in alarms if that priority is 800. And then here I have an example of doing a specific name. So I created a couple of digital alarms, digital 1, digital 2, and if I were to trigger those, then it would be pulled in based on whatever route I chose. And then last, I have one for my analog. I created several analog alarms, 1 through 4. And so this one would bring in all analogs in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and click plus here. This kind of show you the options we have. We mentioned the priority. You can do a priority range if you like. You can even slide it to different levels that you want. Or you can type in a number manually here. And then you can do specific names. And the way these work, so you have a category here of tag names. Here's the groups, which we mentioned in the slides. We put examples there. And we have the priorities. And so if you were to create one for each area, we have specific tag names, and it'd have to be in that group, and it'd have to have this priority range. And so it'd have to fit all these filters precisely if I did a filter for each one. Because again, it's using and statements, so I would need digital, and it would have to be in a group if I was going to do group A, and it would have to have this priority range. If any of these did not meet, then it would not trigger that alarm. So what most people like to do is, let's get rid of, I'm going to get rid of a couple, so I have to actually highlight the row, and then I'll get my delete button. If I want to delete my group, I have to highlight it, and I should get my, or no, sorry, I'm just going to go to all groups here. And then if I don't want my priority range, then I can just go to all priorities. And so this way you can kind of mix and match what you want. One thing I failed to mention is that when you're doing in between here, so earlier we mentioned these are and statements between tag, group, and priorities, and these are or statements. So it's, does the tag have this digital alarm, or does it have this analog? And so that's a good way of bringing in both my digital and my analogs if I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this and move on to, now that I have my subscriptions created, now I have to add it to a route. And so here's where I've set them up. I have my technician subscriptions going to my maintenance strategy. So if one of those alarms were to trigger, it would only go to who I had set for my maintenance. And if the alarm didn't match any of these filters, then it's going to move on to the second one and check whatever filters I set for this. If it matched, it would go to my advanced maintenance strategy. And then my reports, if the filters match the type of stuff I'm doing for my reports, then it's going to go to my configuration strategy, and so on. Stepping back just a minute here, so as far as creating the InTouch connection, it's pretty simple, especially if you're installed on a local machine with View running on that machine. Really just for the node name, put in the local host. You don't really need to put in the computer name or IP address. If it's the same computer where Window Maker or Window Viewer is launching, then just localhost is fine. And this name can be whatever you want. I've heard some mixed things about, does it have to be the application name or the name that you have in InTouch? And really it does not. I can type whatever I want here, and it's just a friendly name. And then if you are trying to do something with the remote desktop services, that's where you have to get into the suite link, and you have to put in the node name for that, and for where that connection is. So it can get tricky there, because that's a scenario where you have the alarm MGR running in session 0, session 1, session 2, session 3, and so you got to specify which node you're actually trying to connect to, which window maker or viewer you're trying to connect to. And then speaking of the session IDs, So we're talking earlier about the Win911 InTouch Runtime, and then window viewer, basically view.exe, that spawns the alarm MGR. And so if we open up Task Manager and we switch to our Details tab, by default, Task Manager is not going to show this session ID. So you can right-click somewhere in these column headers, go to Select Columns, and then you can select your session ID to display it or not. So we'll hit OK. So here we see Alarm MGR, and because Window Viewer spawned it, or my InTouch Runtime spawned it, and they're both considered applications, it's running in the interactive session, the user session, so session 1. And what needs to match is alarm.exe with the Win911 InTouch.exe. And so here we can see that these are running in 1. If we notice here, these are all services running in Windows services, and so they're running in session 0, the console session. And so that's where the mix-up can happen, is if you have Alarm MGR, just one of them running in session 0, and then that means Win911 is not going to be able to process alarms because it's running in session 1, and it's not going to be able to communicate with the Alarm MGR running in session 0. If you were to do RDP and somehow only spawn Alarm MGR in session 2, 3, or 4, and again, Win911 is only running in session 1, it's not going to be able to connect that way. It needs to make sure it connects to the session 1 ID. And then the last thing I'd like to show you real quick is one of our new features in Log Viewer. This is our latest version. We now have the ability to export our historical data. And so you would have to come in here, uncheck the box, and we would need to set our date range first, because it's only going to export whatever date range you select. It doesn't export everything at once. And so let's say I want to go back a couple of months, and I'll select that. And I want to bring it all the way through here. I'll click my export, and I get to choose what type of file I want to save it as. I can do CSV, Excel, or PDF. I'm going to go ahead and choose a PDF file and just save it to my desktop. And let me bring this up for a second, because I don't actually have a PDF viewer on my VM here. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste it to my laptop real quick and show you what it can look like. And so I'll open that, and here we get a list of all the alarms that were for my date range. Not too many, but here you can kind of see it goes back to 8/11, so it's probably around the time I created this VM. And then the same is true. Let me get out of here and go back to my VM. The same is true as if you want to see the notifications. So you could always go to the notification tab, set your date range, hit your export. It actually renames the file to notifications instead. I'd prefer PDF myself, so I'm going to just save it as that. It'll save it to my desktop here. I don't have a viewer for that, so I'm going to copy and paste that to my laptop real quick. And now we get to see my notifications. Looks like it kind of split the page up a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of split the columns because it's not wide enough. But I imagine if I just switch this to landscape view, then it would probably look much better. So something you can do there if you'd like. Let's go ahead and get out of there. And let's go back to our demo. And so earlier we mentioned about the contacts utility. And what that is, it's a separate install. So when you get your thumb drive from Win911, or if you download it from our website and extract the zip file, you will see it in the installation files. It's going to be under Tools, and we have the option to install the contacts utility. And we have a new feature called Announcer. And what Announcer does is annunciate over the sound card. Let me go ahead and start that for you. When you install these, it installs. It'll add shortcuts to the Win911 folder, and so we could do Announcer from here. And it's based on subscriptions or to the strategy. So I could do just different ones that I want to enunciate on if I want, but right now I'm just going to keep it on all strategies. And then I can select which voice selection I want, Zero or David. If you buy our premium voices, then you'll get a lot more options there. And then the alarm format is what you want to hear, and this is the default. And so this is a good time to bring up the alarm comment that we mentioned earlier. So the alarm comment actually goes to the condition description, but not the name. It's going to be just the condition description itself. And that didn't quite work out the way I wanted there, but it would be just the condition description, not the condition description name, because the name is basically the name of the tag in a sense. But just the condition description is the InTouch alarm comment. Or if you were to override it, and where we imported the tags earlier and saw where we could check that box and put in our own description if we wanted to. I'm going to cancel out of that and just get it back to where it was. But you can change this. So right now this is the preview here, and it's kind of saying what's the tag description and name, what's the condition description and name, is it acts or is it an active state, and is it act or not. And then we can type other stuff in here if we want, and we can kind of see now that it's adding the preview to it. And then maybe I want to put in a new condition here. We have a few options, so we could put in the value, and this is the test part as well. And we could always say another property if we want, and we can add as much as we want in here. So I can say severity here. And that looks a bit more sense right there. And so you can kind of see, you can really customize it if you like. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And then say as is where perhaps when the announcer is saying it, it's not saying it correctly. And so you can tell it to actually say it a certain way. I think when it was saying it this way, it was just saying WIN-911 or 911, I think is what it was saying, WIN-911. And so we wanted to say Win911, so we told it to say Win911, and it actually sounds great that way. So if I were to take that out, oh, that's not actually going to work that way. Never mind. But oh, I got an idea. Let's put it in like this, and we can hear what it sounds like. Oh, I still said it right anyway. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the best example. Here's probably a better example. So the alarm comes in, and it said the tag name says ALM. It'll actually say alarm. If you see CNF, it'll actually say change from normal. And so these are just ways of making it actually say what you want. And then last but not least, let me cancel that. The connectivity, you can always install this on another machine if you like, and you would just say I'm connecting to from another computer. But right now I'm on this computer, so I'm going to stick with this. You can tell it whether or not to start up with Windows and enable a connection warning. So if somehow the announcer gets closed or something happens or it's not connected properly, sorry, not that announcer closes, but maybe it's lost connection to InTouch, it would let us know here. And we're going to go ahead and cancel that. The last thing I just wanted to show you real quick is the contacts utility. So here I've actually embedded a button, and if I hit that button, it will open up contacts utility. We're going to connect to this computer. That should have already been that way, but because once you set that once, it shouldn't do it again. And I can select my tactics if I want. This is the one I was playing around with in Workspace. So maybe if I want to change the order, or maybe if I want to remove someone, I can always do that. Maybe I want to remove Ryan, I can save that. And then I can go to connections, and here I can change the hours around if I want. I can rename them if I wanted to, or switch their roles around. And that will do it. That's some of our new features in the later versions. Hope you enjoy and try them out and let us know what you think. And if you run into any issues, definitely open a ticket with us.